Well met, everyone. I am Rich DeLitch, and today I am going to talk about military. The spark of this is waking up early morning today, as it is now, November 11th, a federal holiday known as Veterans Day in the United States. And as a veteran myself, I am kind of thinking through and running through the process of all the various units and people that I have been associated with and those that I have met that fill all these different tasks and all these different divisions within the United States military. And while I never create a world and world build in a fictional sense with having this strict adherence to how it works in the real world, one thing that emulating or kind of at least respecting the way and understanding the way things work in the real world, they create a sense of believability and they create a world that feels lived in. I think that's one of the strengths of Game of Thrones, or you look at Lord of the Rings, right? The amount of depth and detail that goes into all of the folk, all of the houses, all the moving parts in Game of Thrones, right? The political machinations and all this other stuff. And then you look at the amount of just ages and just depth and layers of something like Tolkien's Middle Earth. We have these worlds that feel like they could have, been a alternate universe or something. Like there was a bubble here on Earth that we can go through and be there in that place. Let's look through this list a little bit of just some questions I want to pose to you and ways that I maybe might think through them a little bit. And hopefully at the end of it all, you just have a little bit of food for thought for some good design. How everything from your town guard to your militia to your fully capable units of war function and exist in your world. And do you even have those distinctions? Do you only have a town guard? Do you have a full sort of standing army that comes from the capital city only? What is their unit of war? Do they have the forces that are capable of defending the entire nation? Obviously, when you're boiling everything down to a hamlet, well, who does that hamlet answer to? Who's the lord, the leader, the mayor, whatever? The de facto sort of just retired innkeeper in Forgotten Realms, and he's kind of the leader of that. Is the leader purely political? Or is it something where he's the leader because if shit hits the fan and wolves attack, he's the single guy that has, he's the best swordsman, he's the strongest person, so on and so forth. But also think through, can the local populace, do they even have any interest in picking up pitchforks and hammers? And, will the blacksmith run out of his blacksmith shop and defend the town from goblins? Will the women and children fight? Do they have to fight? Are they forced to fight? So on and so forth. You can start creating a lot of moving parts. And think about it, how if the women and children don't fight, they don't need to, there's enough forces out there, well, that now presents that, that female NPC as sort of a quest giver. I need your help with this because half of our military forces are currently in the northern woods hunting this great beast or whatever, and I need you to help defend my home from this, or I have a problem with livestock. Who do the local normal people, the townsfolk, the residents go to when they have a problem? Does your world, so again, at the small level, your town, do they need special forces? Towns are not, even if it's a coastal town, they're not going to have a navy. There's no reason to have a ship that's worth 50,000 gold, populated with 17 soldiers, sitting off the coast of a coastal town that only has resources of nothing more than some bread and maybe stew. There's a disconnect there. It doesn't make sense. So think through, do you have sort of special forces? Do you have any units that work within the militaries that the PCs might go to if they need a little bit of intrigue and espionage? And think through things like Ravnica and House Demir and various resources is there an entire spy network? Are they associated to the military? And kind of going back to that first point of the distinction between, do you have a town guard? Do you have fully capable units of war? Are the uniforms the same? What are the distinctions? How do your PCs know when they're dealing with, oh, this guy's just town guard, or this guy's a part of the army, or this guy is part of special forces unit? Can they tell the difference? Do you have other special task units such as FBI and CIA? I think looking through whether it's Bourne Identity movies and things like this, and not getting into the political side of stuff, but just thinking through all those awesome movies, right? And various assassin things and John Wick and stuff like this, you can start to create these little mini units of, drow and a little pocket of rogues that are over here. And you think they're a part of a thieves guild, but they're actually funded and their resources are coming from the same resources that fund the town guard. And you can start to create a bunch of layers of interest and intrigue here when those guys are sort of above and beyond the law in how they can operate. They're ultimately benevolent, but this little task unit of secret spies, rogues, assassins, are responsible for removing threats before they become a threat. But yet they're not subject to the same law, you know what I mean? And you can start to create a bunch of those things, but think through if you have that stuff. If you have town patrols, do you have them at all? And how far do they go? Because that informs us as to what are the threats going to be like, how far outside of that bubble of a town or a city. Everything 3 miles outside of this city, be careful. Don't camp out there. But you can start to create a bunch of interesting bits when you have a town that only has a single inn or tavern, and they've only got 6 beds, and I have a group of 9 people that walk in. There's nowhere to put them. Or maybe I just have some PCs that, they're druids, and they don't want to, whatever. They're barbarians, and they're not very cultured and civilized. They don't want to, they hate towns. They hate cities. They would rather just stay in the woods. But if they're low level, it makes sense that you can start to inform them through rumors and stuff like this that all of the CR9 plus monsters are within 10 miles of the town and the city. They're always out there because we don't have patrols that can patrol those areas. What was the Aomer and talking about the Riddermark and the Riders of Rohan, our lands are challenged, unchecked. Orcs roam freely. Wait, what? Orcs roam freely, so on and so forth. So think about those patrols. Reinforcements. If things go really bad very quickly, that CR9 monster actually gets a little uppity, right? And why hasn't he already? That's another good thing to think through. That CR9 monster approaches the town and comes in. Are there reinforcements? How close is the nearest, not just town or settlement for supplies and whatnot, but how close is the nearest group that they can pull from? Oftentimes you can start looking through the various layers of what is the king or the lord of a region obligated to provide? Is he obligated to provide protection? But if so, does he only provide a dozen riders at most? And how fast can those reinforcements get there? Remember, we don't have the benefits in these imaginary fictional medieval worlds of reinforcements being drop shipped in like, a freaking Warhammer 40k Space Marine unit. Things take time to get there. That happened in Game of Thrones, right? If the city is attacked and they're on the way, it's a big deal. But also it's a big deal to send out a unit for war 3 weeks out and then now tell them, turn around. How do you get that command to them? So on and so forth. You know what I mean? Like, do you have... If the reinforcements just sort of suddenly show up to fix the problems, well, did they gate and teleport to get there? But if so, if that level of high-level wizard magic is so available for them to gate and teleport reinforcements back to a place that they need to defend, why is that teleportation magic not so prevalent everywhere else in your world? Your PCs are going to start asking these questions of like, well, why the hell can't we have 7,000 gold. Why can't we pay for a gate to go here? Why do we have to lug through 200 miles of random encounters? You know what I mean? Like, you have to start creating some consistency. Based on the military and stuff like this, is there corruption in your world or corruption related to them? So does the king lead the army or is there a general? And if there is a general, is that general sort of the de facto leader of the nation simply because the militia is the most powerful force? If force and the use of strength and weapons is paramount, and the best way to demonstrate your power, does that general technically lead where the king or whatever is just more of a figurehead? Does the king allow it to be this way? Maybe the king doesn't want to be in the spotlight. What are the sort of local things that come about by your involvement of your military and your militia? Again, if you have a separation between town guard to military to fully operational units of war, the PCs may not deal with them on a day-to-day basis. When there's a problem in the tavern or someone they need to go to of, hey, I witnessed a crime. This dude stole my Vorpal weapon, whatever. What are the laws in place? Who sets them? Who enforces them? Are there curfews? Is there religious things where at night they believe the darkness comes, so all the temples shut down, or the temples keep open so that you can go to a place of light and refuge and holiness, but all the street lamps go off at night, and everyone, once night falls, that's when the dark evil gods come out. So everyone's supposed to be off the streets. But who enforces that stuff? And on that note, if it is sort of town guard or just local militia, and how do you identify, as I said earlier, can you distinguish them between uniform and whatnot, and what their sort of level of play is. Like what are the rules that the militia has to fall under versus the town guard? Like how far outside of bounds can they go? Okay. But do you have a police force? And is that separate from the town guard? Are we talking about a different group? Are we talking about an independently funded group? And kind of on that note, what are the other sort of first responders, right? Like if there's a massive catastrophe or emergency, which is often the case in D&D, right? Because we have giant monsters in an entire monster manual that we want to present a threat to the world that the PCs need to help fix. But what are the consequences and ramifications of that? Especially when we tie it into if the PCs did nothing and all of a sudden the walls are now crumbling down because you've got these giant beasts that are being mounted by these lizard folk guys. Whatever's happening, who are the first responders? Is it just simply the medical staff? Is it just all of the priests in every local shrine and temple need to kind of rally up and pull the wounded off the streets? Where do they bring them? Are there people that simply put out fires? In a world with people casting meteor swarm and fireballs, who handles the collateral damage? You know what I mean? Like the PCs might be able to handle the wizards that are casting fireballs and destroying the city. But if some wizards have already done that damage, what are the construction crews that are responsible for fixing that stuff? And I think by thinking through that, you start creating a living, breathing world with a bunch of moving parts. And lastly, this is a big one. I kind of alluded to it a little bit where I talked about the visuals and how they function. But when you see those individuals with two-handed swords or sword and shield and full plate armor, because you want to give... So here's a problem, right? Your PCs are a little bit rowdy, right? They're murder hobos. You've got some members in your group that are just looking and itching to get the attraction of the Dark Brotherhood, right, from Elder Scrolls. And they come in, they're going to cause problems. And one thing you want to do is you want to kind of focus the game to its central spots and create some cool content without letting the PCs get too unruly. So what happens a lot of times is you'll see stuff where it's like, well, you'll notice, dude, this is not the place for you to start your shit because all the town guards wearing full plate. And you start to indicate visually based on equipment and gear and, they're all, they got the mustache and they're all retired high-level adventurers, so on. They've dungeon delved for 15 years, and they all look like... Who's the actor with the massive, awesome mustache? Oh, what the hell is his name? I've seen him in Westerns, and he's been in a lot of movies with Patrick Swayze. Sam something. Anyway, they all look like just this grizzled old veteran, and they're wearing full plate and have awesome weapons. And you're indicating that to the players to be like, don't mess with these guys. They're better equipped than you are. The problem with that is, if that's what the local militia has, who's supplying that stuff? How do they eat? If you want to keep it on, an order and justice within your town, maybe one way you can do that is just have a couple of people that are just really diligent and they're just on top of it. They only sleep, they're elves. There's always a watchful eye. Maybe someone does have scrying capability. That's how they keep the peace because they're always aware of everything going on. Versus keeping the peace by having a hamlet of 30 people and there's 17 town guards standing and walking among the hamlet. Who the hell feeds these guys? And if that's the case, then imagine what the force might be like in a town and a village and further on into a city. If there's a force of 40,000 militia, they need to eat. But when you think through that, you start to create content because now you can start thinking through if someone has interrupted those supply lines of food, we now can't feed the 30,000 soldiers. If we can't feed 30,000 soldiers, we definitely can't feed the 1,500 town guard that are populating all the different towns throughout the region. Therefore, there's a few towns that have a single guard. But now you've just created quest hooks and adventure because now the PCs are needed to keep the peace for a month while the local leadership figures out what the hell are we going to do about our absence of town guard and how long that relay is to the king of saying, yo, dude, Sir, Lord Emperor, the town way in the southwest has a problem. There's no town guard anymore. The story is adventurers are kind of keeping the peace. So on and so forth. So there's a lot of moving parts there, and it all got me thinking just through Veterans Day and just the various military and special forces and whatnot. But I think thinking through that is a big important part because in every world, especially your own built stuff, you're always going to populate every town, every place with soldiers. Folk that are there to defend, destroy, so on and so forth. And when you can kind of think through how your PCs relate to the moving parts there, you create a very living, breathing world, and you create a wealth of content. That's all I have for you folks today. Thanks everyone for watching, and take care.